Welcome back. This one is about money mindset, but really it is about self-knowledge. We are getting into rich life rules, weird money habits, prenups, and why people freeze around money. And the funniest part is how personal all of it gets the second you stop pretending money is just math. The book really starts with the uncomfortable truth that most people never define what they want. That is the whole trap, because then you are just optimizing for some random scoreboard. So you end up rich in spreadsheets and broke in actual joy. Exactly, and then people act surprised when the house, the car, and the stress arrive together. What I like is that his version of wealth is not about flexing every expense. It is about cutting the stuff you do not care about so you can spend hard on what you do care about. Which is annoying because that means you actually have to know yourself. That part is deeply inconvenient, yes. The appetizer story is so good because it sounds silly until you get it. If you grew up never ordering the extra thing, that tiny choice feels like luxury. And childhood money habits are so sticky that people do not even notice they are still obeying them. That line about hearing "we can't afford it" 1,000 times is brutal. Because then as an adult, you are making adult money with a kid's nervous system. That is why his 4 numbers idea hits so hard, because it makes money visible. Fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt-free spending, and suddenly the fog clears a bit. It is almost offensive how simple the right system can be. People hate that because they want a secret, not a checklist. The flight example is also such a nice mindset shift. He moved from judging business class to getting curious about why someone would pay for it. That is a huge jump because most people stay in moral outrage mode forever. Bro, half of money culture is just sneering at somebody else's preferences. Curiosity is usually where the better money decisions begin. That rule about buying the best and keeping it a long time is also weirdly elegant. Like the 17-year-old Honda Accord is basically a philosophy statement on wheels. Very unsexy, very strong. And then he flips it with unlimited spending on health and education, which is the smartest flex in the whole thing. Because if your body breaks or your brain stays small, the rest of the portfolio is decorative. People will protect a checking account like it's sacred and ignore their own health. That is the wrong religion. The Stanford bookstore story is honestly hilarious in a rich kid way, but also moving. It shows how much permission matters when you have never had it before. Then the conversation shifts into couples, and that is where it gets really messy. Because money is never just money once 2 people are involved. It is housing, children, parents, travel, resentment, all of it wearing a spreadsheet costume. That is the best description of marriage finance I have heard. What struck me most was his point that couples usually only talk about money when something is already on fire. That is such a bad pattern because then money becomes a punishment conversation. And somehow Target becomes the villain in the entire relationship. Target catches strays in every married person's life. But his fix is actually mature, which is to talk proactively and start with appreciation. That part matters because praise lowers the emotional temperature immediately. If you begin with respect, the other person does not feel ambushed. And the prenup section, man, that was the part people probably pretend not to care about. But it is actually one of the cleanest examples of how money creates fear in relationships. Nobody wants to say, "I want a legal plan because I am scared." They say it as distrust. And then the whole conversation gets poisoned. His therapist example was great because it exposed the real issue instantly. He saw money as growth, she saw money as safety, and suddenly the argument made sense. That is the kind of mismatch that sounds irrational until you hear it out loud. Then it is like, oh wow, we have been fighting in different languages this whole time. And that childhood layer is the real story underneath all of it. The voices from home become the script in your 20s and 30s. I also liked his point that gender changes the money lens, but it is not the only variable. You see different instincts around risk, safety, and investing, but class and upbringing matter too. Which is why any money conversation that pretends everyone starts from the same place is nonsense. Economic theory loves a fictional human being. The totally rational, perfectly informed robot who never had a childhood. The richer point from the back half is that successful people are often good at many things, not one. That is actually comforting, because it means excellence is transferable. They prepare, they show up, they think long-term, and they carry that across domains. So the real flex is not genius, it is consistency with range. That is annoying for all of us hoping for a shortcut. And the three traits he would bet against are honestly a little painful. Bad company, impulsiveness, and no personal vision of a rich life. That last one is wild because so many people want money but have no picture of what it buys them. They want the Ferrari because Ferrari, which is basically empty desire with a logo on top. A very expensive identity crisis. Exactly, and he is right that without a vision, money just becomes drift. The series ending lands well because it keeps coming back to freedom of choice. Not just freedom to spend, but freedom to decide where your time, energy, and life go. That is why the rich life idea is bigger than wealth. It is almost a design problem disguised as a finance problem. If you do not design it, somebody else will design it for you. Usually an algorithm with terrible taste. And that is the actual warning for the whole series. Do not outsource your life to default settings. That feels like the right place to land for the final episode. Thanks for riding through the whole series with us. We came for money tips and accidentally ended up in a self-awareness seminar, which honestly is the better outcome. See you on the next one. Welcome back, because this one is all about the rich life part nobody wants to admit is a decision. We are talking money rules, weird childhood scripts, and why people dodge the real question. And somehow appetizers became a personality test, which is honestly one of the more relatable financial theories I have ever heard. The appetizer thing hit me because it is not about shrimp, it is about permission. If you grew up measuring everything, then 2 appetizers can feel like a victory lap. A very expensive victory lap, but still. Bro, exactly. And that is why these money rules are so weirdly intimate. People think finance is math, but half of it is emotional archaeology. The crazy part is, he is not saying spend randomly, he is saying spend on purpose. That is the part most people pretend they already do. Yeah, because everybody says, I am intentional while buying nonsense at midnight. The self-awareness gap is doing a lot of heavy lifting in modern life. And his 4 numbers idea is basically a reality check for that gap. Fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt-free spending, that is the whole game. If you cannot name those 4, you are not in charge. You are just hoping. Hoping is not a strategy. It is a coping mechanism with better branding. That line should be stitched on every personal finance course. What I like is that it reduces shame without reducing responsibility. Because shame makes people hide, and hidden money problems get weird fast. Yeah, and then the conversation only happens when something breaks. Which is exactly what he keeps hitting with couples. Most people do not talk about money. They weaponize silence and call it peace. And then they act shocked when the target joke has become a marital tradition. That was brutal because it is funny until it is not funny at all. Right? Because the joke is usually carrying resentment underneath it. And his point about starting with compliments is such a simple reset. Like, before you complain, acknowledge what your partner already does well. That alone could save half the arguments people call communication issues. A lot of it is really tone, timing, and whether both people feel safe. And then the prenup conversation gets even more interesting because it is basically trust under pressure. People hear prenup and immediately imagine betrayal, not planning. That is because movies trained everyone to think every contract is an insult. The algorithm of romance is absolutely terrible, but his version is actually about clarity, not cynicism. If you already know what came in, what gets shared, and what is joint, that is just adult life. The fact that people can be married and still in the dark is the wild part. And the therapist moment was huge because safety and growth are not the same instinct. That one answer explains so many money fights that look irrational from the outside. One person is thinking compound interest, and the other is thinking emergency buffer. That is such a great summary of a doomed argument. And it is not even about who is right, it is about what each person is optimizing for. That is why his childhood framing matters so much, because the script starts early. The phrase, "we cannot afford it," can echo for decades. And then a grown adult with good income still feels guilty buying dinner. That is not a numbers problem, that is a memory problem. I also love the part about curiosity replacing judgment on money. He literally moved from disparagement to curiosity, and that changes everything. Because once you stop sneering at business class, you start asking better questions. Like, wait, is this person rich or just injured? Or maybe their company is just paying and you are being dramatic in economy. Exactly. And that humility is actually the real upgrade. It is funny how money wisdom often starts with one less stupid assumption. Same with the idea that rich people are just richer versions of everyone else. He pushed back on that hard and said the best people are good at many things. They show up, they prepare, they care socially, they carry discipline across domains. That is annoying because it means there is no shortcut personality for success. Yeah, you cannot just be brilliant and chaotic and hope the universe files it under charm. The 3 traits he gave for people who will not build a rich life were pretty sharp. Bad company, impulsiveness, and no personal vision. That last one is the killer because most people want money, not a rich life. They want the symbols because symbols are easier to post than values. Ferrari as an identity is honestly one of the emptiest dreams imaginable. If your dream has no story, it is probably just social contamination. And then he comes back to the real challenge. Define your own Saturday. That is such a ruthless question because it exposes fake priorities instantly. Nobody says they want 3 hours of laundry unless something has gone deeply wrong. Unless they are secretly laundering money and trying to sound mysterious. In which case, respect the hustle, I guess. But seriously, money is supposed to buy back friction. Less laundry, less airport stress, less stupid friction, more life. And yet people keep spending on things that make their days worse. That is the tragedy. They optimize for appearances and then live in discomfort. The funny part is, he is not anti-house, anti-flight, or anti-spending at all. He is anti-default, which is way more irritating and way more useful. Because default feels normal, and normal is extremely expensive. Especially when it keeps you from ever asking what you actually want. And that is why the series lands where it does. Self-awareness before optimization. If you do not know what matters, every financial win stays kind of hollow. You can have a big number and still feel poor in the only places that count. That is the whole point of this final episode, really. Not more money for the sake of more money, but more choice, more honesty, more design. And maybe a couple more appetizers if the moment feels right. That is the official conclusion of the Rich Life Doctrine, apparently. Thanks for being here through all 3 episodes with us. We hope this made money feel a little less mysterious and a lot more usable. And if it did not, at least you now have better questions to ask. We will see you on the next one. Welcome back. This one is about designing your rich life instead of guessing it. We are talking money rules, childhood baggage, and the brutal honesty couples avoid. Also, why appetizers can feel like a tiny rebellion against your old life. That appetizers thing is hilarious because it is not about food at all. It is about a kid becoming an adult and finally saying yes without flinching. Exactly, and that is why the whole thing lands so hard. People think wealth is just a bigger number, but the real shift is intention. Because otherwise you are just stacking cash with no actual life attached to it. Which is a very expensive hobby if you think about it. Bro, that is the most polite way to say emotional hoarding. And the 4 numbers idea is so clean because it cuts through the noise. Fixed costs, savings, investments, guilt-free spending, done. That simplicity is almost offensive to people who love overcomplicating finance. Especially the spreadsheet priests who worship cell B43 like it is a religion. B43 has never once helped anyone have a better dinner. That line right there should be framed in every finance office. The point is not to live inside the optimization machine forever. The point is to get the system working and then get back to living. That part feels rare because people are addicted to feeling productive. And money can become a costume for productivity if you let it. The wild part is how much childhood still drives all of it. The phrase he kept coming back to was that money messages stick. If you grew up hearing "we cannot afford it," that echo does not disappear at 25. It shows up later as guilt, hesitation, or weird overcorrection. Or the classic adult move where you earn more and still feel broke. Because the operating system never got updated. And then there is the relationship stuff, which is where it gets spicy. Spicy is one word, emotionally expensive is another. Most couples only talk about money when something is already on fire. Then they act surprised that the conversation sounds like a police report. Right, because nothing says romance like discussing resentment at the Target checkout line. That Target joke was doing way too much work and somehow still not enough. The better move is proactive, boring, honest conversations before the damage builds. Even the prenup conversation, which people treat like a grenade. He made it clear the issue is not trust, it is clarity about risk and fairness. And that is where people get emotionally lazy, because they hear the word and panic. But if you cannot discuss the hard thing, you probably do not have the relationship yet. That is the uncomfortable truth, yeah. What I loved is how he said money means different things to different people. For him, it was growth. For his wife, it was safety. That one question probably saved them years of arguing in circles. Because once you know the lens, the fight stops looking stupid and starts looking human. Not stupid, just underlabeled. Exactly, and that is why curiosity beats judgment every time. Even his thing about business class was not about flexing. It was about moving from contempt to curiosity. Which is such a big shift because contempt is basically financial brain damage. Financial brain damage is wild, but yes, totally. If you only look at other people's spending to judge them, you never learn anything. You just keep reinforcing your own little moral theater. And then you fly economy and act spiritually superior about it. That is so real and so embarrassing. The best people, according to him, are good at multiple domains. That part felt important because people love the myth of the genius disaster. Like you can be brilliant at work and useless at life, and somehow that counts. That myth is mostly just a convenient excuse for being sloppy. Exactly. The real people you bet on show up, prepare, and transfer skills. They are not magic, they are just disciplined in a bunch of places. And the flip side is brutal too. No vision, impulsive decisions, bad company. That bad company point is underrated because the room around you shapes your ceiling, especially when the people around you keep mocking ambition. Nothing kills future wealth faster than being called weird for planning ahead, or being told not to get too big for your britches. That is such a revealing phrase, by the way. It teaches people to stay small when they start to expand. And then the other huge thing is the idea that a rich life is designed. Nobody accidentally stumbles into one. That is the biggest unlock of all, honestly. Because once you ask what your perfect Saturday looks like, money gets practical. Suddenly laundry, airport chaos, and random obligations become solvable problems. Money as a problem solver instead of a status toy is a refreshing idea. It makes the whole thing less glamorous and more useful, which is probably why it actually works. And I think that is the note to end on for the whole series. Not more money for the sake of more money, but more clarity, more choice, more peace. If this series did anything, I hope it made money feel less like fog. And maybe made you a little more suspicious of bad financial theater. Because the real flex is knowing what you want and building toward it. Thanks for riding with us through all 3 episodes, seriously. We will see you on the next one.